Most common watercolour mistakes. In this video we're going to be looking at backruns, cauliflowers and blooms. Welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name's Michelle and my channel is all about art. So it's all about learning to paint and draw, particularly watercolour painting is my speciality. So particularly there'll be a lot of watercolour but some other mixed media stuff too, and also art business and social media training for artists. So please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell notification, you'll get notified whenever I have a new video for you. So the technical term would be backruns, but I've always called them cauliflowers. Some people, particularly in America, seem to call them blooms. So they're those kind of frilly, wiggly edged circular shapes that appear sometimes when you are watercolour painting. So are they a good thing or are they a bad thing? The truth is they can be both. So if you're making a sky and you're trying to get a lovely flat area of clean looking watercolour, you know, a nice flat wash, and you get one of these backruns right in the middle of your sky, well, it can ruin your painting, can't it? They just appear and they're so annoying. However, if you're trying to create maybe a foreground, some foliage, some trees, then they can be really useful. So in this video, we're going to look at several aspects of these. So I'm going to talk briefly about what makes them happen. I'm going to show you what makes them happen. And I'm also going to show you how to avoid them. I'm going to tell you how to stop them in their tracks. If you start to see them happen, what you can do to stop them, because people always do the wrong thing and tend to make them worse. And then at the end, I'm going to show you exactly how to create them, because they can be really beautiful additions to your painting if you get them in the right place. So this video is all about understanding what makes them happen and controlling them so that you can either choose to have them or not. So in a second I'm going to point the camera downwards and show you some examples of what I'm talking about. Let's talk briefly about why backruns occur. I'm going to call them backruns. They're also cauliflowers and blooms, but I can't keep using three words through the whole video, so I'm going to describe them as backruns, which would probably be the most technical term for them. So what causes them to happen in the first place? Well, it's basic science. So I have the least scientific brain on the planet, but even I can understand this one. So what happens is if you get an area of paint or water, it doesn't matter, either applies. If you get an area of paint or water that is starting to dry, so it's not fully wet, but it's not dry either, it's just damp. And then you either drop paint or water onto that area or put it next to that area, the wetter paint or water is attracted to the damp area. So it's all about water levels, and it's all about the water wanting to sit flat and even itself out. So water always has to sit flat in a landscape, and water's heavier than air, so it always wants to sit flat. Now it's only going to ever move up if it has some kind of force behind it, which you would have in waves or maybe a fountain or something like that, or a waterfall. Then your water can defy gravity and briefly move up. But most of the time, if it's left to its own devices, it just wants to lay flat, and it wants to lay flat and even. Therefore, if you get some wet paint or very wet water, sounds strange, doesn't it, wet water, but you know what I mean. If you get this wet area of liquid, then it's going to want to spread across the damp area so that the water levels become even and it sits flat. Now, if you put that drippy paint or that water on a dry area, you've got surface tension. So the water's going to try and stay in the same place because of surface tension. It's got no incentive to go anywhere else. But if you put it on a damp area or next to a damp area, it immediately wants to spread across and into that damp area. And if it's a dot of water or a dot of paint in a damp area, then it's going to want to spread evenly outwards, assuming that the paper's not tipped and assuming that the damp area is all the way around the spot of water. It's going to want to spread roughly evenly out in a circular pattern. So if all that sounds a little bit confusing, I'm going to point the camera down now and you'll be able to see it happen. So we're looking down at my drawing board now, and let's have a go at making a backrun happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some yellow paint on here, and this I think is Cadmium Yellow Deep by Talon's Rembrandt. So it's a nice golden sunshiny yellow. I'm picking a light colour on purpose so we get some stronger colour for the background so that you can see it happening. So I've applied my paint there, and I'm going to give it a second while it gets sort of semi-dry. It's quite warm in here today, so it won't take a moment to happen. I'm working today on practice paper, so it's not stretched or anything like that, but when you are painting yourself, I highly advise you to stretch your paper. I do have a video on this. It's so important because with backruns, what will happen is if your paper dips and buckles, is the paint will sit in little puddles and you'll get the effect of backruns happening regardless of what you do. So stretching your paper doesn't entirely cause it to not buckle at all, but it's a really, really big help. So if you want to avoid backruns where you don't want them, I advise you to work on stretched paper. I'm just doing a few little practice bits here for you today, so I haven't bothered to do that today. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get some paint that's much wetter. Let's get some bright red. I think this might be a cadmium red deep. And all I'm going to do is drip that wetter paint into the damp paint. Look at that. You can see these backruns happening straight away because, as I said at the beginning, we've got damp paint and then we've got wetter paint and it wants to spread out. So there you are. That's your backruns and that's what causes them. And we're going to have a go at the end. I mean, we have made some here, but we're going to have a go at the end making some really more sort of interesting ones and showing you how that you could use them in a landscape, for example. So if that's how you make them, how do you prevent them from happening? Well, we're going to use the same colours again, and this time I'm going to be using more even washes of paint. So I'm putting the paint on again. It's a little bit darker, not for any reason, I just happen to have picked up a bit more on my brush, and I'm going to apply it, but this time I'm going to be a little bit quicker and try not to give it a chance to dry too much. I'm going to clean my brush, and now I'm going to go in with the red again, but this time I'm going to use much drier red, so much stickier, much less drippy. And what we should be able to do then is just place it on the paper. There we go. And you see how I've got a soft edge now, but it's not really going anywhere. It's not bleeding outwards like this one is, and that's because the water levels were about the same. The paint that I put on second wasn't wetter than the paint I put on first. I mean, where it has been a tiny bit wetter, you can see a little bit of bleeding around the edge there, but you know, that's nothing much to worry about. The ones that cause you the real problems are these ones where they spread and spread and spread. So if you don't want them, how do you stop these from happening? So what often happens is you might be applying a wash of paint. Let's have a go. Let's just put some cobalt blue on, and you're applying maybe some paint in your sky. I'm going to have to be careful here and try and do it wrong, as it were. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to accidentally leave some paint in the middle that's a bit wetter than the other paint. It's quite hard to make this happen, but we'll see if we can sort of do a trial as if you were painting a sky. So here we are. I've applied this paint, but I've accidentally left an area in the middle here that's somewhat wetter. Let's just give that even a bit more unevenness just for the sake of the video, so that we have a chance to correct the mistake. So what happens is you're working down your sky and you get down to here, and then you look up the top, or you look at the bit that you've already painted, and it has started to make, you can just see the beginnings. As the rest dries, you're going to end up with one of these cauliflower marks, one of these backruns. So this bit here is drying nice and evenly, but oh goodness, this bit here, you can see it's just starting to happen. It's going to start making a drying line. So how do you stop it in its tracks before it's dried? Well, what most people do is they panic immediately and they pick up, you know, a wet brush of paint and they go back and they start prodding at it or trying to smooth it out. But this just makes the problem worse because they're actually adding more wet paint to the damp area. Another thing that people do is to grab a tissue like this and to blot, but again that makes it worse because you'll get hard edge drying shapes here, and again you're not evening out the water level. So although yes, you do need to even it out a little bit, just doing this won't help. What you need to do is go almost across the whole area, because what you're looking to do is even out the water levels across the entire area. So that may be the whole of the sky, or perhaps just the area that you've worked in so far, but if you see it happening, what you've got to do is even out the water levels in that whole area, not just prod at that back run with a damp brush, because that's going to make it worse. Now I've evened out across the whole area, and you can see now there's nowhere to dry unevenly. So let's look now at when you might actually want to make these backgrounds and cauliflowers happen. They can be really, really useful in landscape painting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint as if I were painting a foreground in a landscape, and we'll apply some yellow. It has still got a bit of blue in it, so it's rather greenish, but that's okay because we're going to be making greens anyway, and a bit of that earlier colour we used. Just going to start applying these yellows, and then I'm going to put in, let's use the cobalt again, and we'll get some green happening there. So this would be how I would be painting a landscape, putting the blues and yellows directly onto the paper. I sometimes go out and give demonstrations to art clubs, and they're always quite shocked that I don't mix the paint up first and I just put it on the paper. And the reason for this is that if you mix a big puddle of green paint and then you apply that evenly to your paper, well, how boring it can look for a foreground when you're actually looking for texture. So just by mixing on the paper, I've got a variety of greens going on here already, and I've got some uneven drying. But in this case, unlike with the sky, I'm going to purposely make it even more uneven. So as it starts to dry, I'm going to work back in with wetter paint, and that can be, I can put any blue or any yellow in. Obviously, if I were doing a landscape, I would be working in some kind of limited palette. I wouldn't just put 20 different types of yellows and greens in. But just for demonstration purposes today, I picked up a bit of phthalo blue. So let's put some of that in. And we're looking for that landscapey feel, so we're going to go in straight lines. A bit mad, strong and in your face, so let's calm it down a bit with some yellow ochre. So you can see as I go up here, I am positively encouraging uneven water levels now, and I'm encouraging this bleeding and these back runs to happen. And I'll drop one or two paintings in that I've done previously where I've used this technique to good effect. So what you're doing here is you're making the most now of the backgrounds. Now because you're dropping them in, there can be a danger of those marks being too circular to look like proper landscape. So that's why I'm continually going backwards to these horizontal marks, so that I don't get too many sort of round edged shapes, but I should still get some nice bleeding and some nice backgrounds going on. And you can do this so many times. You know, I can go back in now with a different type of yellow, perhaps with some more lemon up here. You can even, if you want to, I'll just use clean water here, so you can even, if you want to, just use water for this. So again, I'm going to drop some water in, and you need to be quite patient with this and wait now and again for areas to dry. See, it's starting to dry here, and by going back in with this water or wet paint, then we can cause those backgrounds to happen. And you'll be amazed if you just let this happen and let this dry. You'll end up with this really interesting area, and then you can look into it again. You can think to yourself, oh well, I could make that into a bush now, or a little set of trees or something like that. So you can almost make your painting paint itself. They do take a while to develop, these backgrounds, so I'm going to give that a few minutes. I'll probably just photograph it at the end and drop that in for you here. I'm also going to show you how to use it in the way that we did at the beginning to make more of a spotted effect. And let's go in with the paler yellow with the lemon this time. And what I want to get this time is more like an effect you might have on something like if you're painting coral perhaps, or stone or something like that, or lichen, and you wanted those little drying marks and little circles and things going on. So again, we're going to give it a second or so to dry, and this is a great technique to combine with salt. So I have got a video that shows you how to combine this technique with salt, and I'll put that in the information card at the top. If you click on any of those little cards, you won't go off this video, it just kind of lines it up for you to watch afterwards. So I'm going to go in with some purple this time. I mean, obviously if you're doing something like rocks, you might use, shall we say, more natural colours, but I'm just using some nice bright colours here so you can see how it's done on camera. So here I'm allowing much more circular marks. I'm not spreading them across like I did with the greens, because I actually just want some random shapes here. Now again, this is a good time to perhaps use some clean water as well. So what I'm going to do is drop the clean water. I could drop it near the purple spots or in the centre of them. So let's just put some around randomly. And again, they take a few minutes to develop properly. Let's go for something else as well. Let's go for a bit of my current favourite love, which is some Daniel Smith manganese blue. Pop a bit of that in too. And notice here, I've just put this bit in here, hasn't gone anywhere. That means the paint underneath is more or less completely dry. So if ever that happens, you know, if you've put a colour down and you want to do this technique on top and you think, oh, I let it dry, just re-wet it with water and let that go semi-dry, and then you can go in with this technique and get these real lovely areas of texture. Again, this will take a few minutes to develop, so I'm going to let it dry and then I'll drop a photograph of that in for you right here. So I hope this video has given you a much clearer understanding of what backruns are and how to either avoid them or use them effectively in your own paintings. Please let me know in the comments if you found this video useful. If you're going to try some of these techniques in your own work, consider subscribing to the channel, and you can watch another one of my videos right now.